Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the apprentice of Ra's al Ghul. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was made of glass, and Izuku Midoriya had just been thrown through it. The city of Muzutafu, usually a vibrant tapestry of noise and light, was now a muted, blurry watercolor painting viewed through a film of tears he no longer had the energy to shed. The cheerful chime of a crosswalk signal, the rumble of a passing train, the distant, triumphant cry of a pro-hero apprehending some petty thief, each sound was a tiny, sharp shard pressing into the raw wound of his heart. He walked without direction. His feet, clad in his familiar red sneakers, scuffed against the pavement with a listless rhythm. One foot, then the other. The simple act of locomotion was the only thing his body remembered how to do. His mind was a maelstrom, trapped in a relentless loop on a single, desolate rooftop. No, I don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. The words weren't just a rejection, they were a verdict. A final, damning judgment handed down by God himself. All Might, the symbol of peace, the pillar of his entire existence, had looked at the sum of his dreams, his life's singular ambition, and declared it worthless. It's good to have dreams, young man. But you need to be realistic. Realistic. Izuku's hands, shoved deep into his pockets, clenched into fists. His knuckles were raw and scraped from his frantic, useless scrabbling at the sludge villain. What was realistic? Was it realistic for heroes to stand by and watch a boy suffocate because their quirks weren't suited for the situation? Was it realistic for them to praise Katsuki Bakugo for his powerful, destructive quirk moments after that same quirk had made him a more volatile hostage? He had seen it all after the chaos subsided. The reporters swarming Bakugo, lauding his bravery and strong will. The heroes giving Bakugo pats on the back while he, Izuku, was being scolded by Kamui Woods and Death Arms for his recklessness. They hadn't seen a desperate act of courage. They had seen a quirkless liability getting in the way. He had run when his legs had finally stopped shaking. He hadn't waited for Bakugo to find him, to scream at him for the ultimate humiliation of being saved by a useless, quirkless Deku. He couldn't face it. He couldn't face the triumphant sneer that would surely be on his childhood friend's face. Because in the end, Bakugo had been right all along. All Might had just confirmed it. A group of children ran past him, one wearing a tiny All Might cape, making whooshing sounds as he pretended to fly. Izuku flinched as if struck, turning his face away and pulling his shoulders inward, trying to make himself smaller, invisible. The sight of that iconic, smiling symbol was now a source of profound, sickening pain. His bedroom, a shrine to that man, suddenly felt like a tomb. How could he go home and face those walls, plastered with the image of the man who had personally executed his soul? His aimless wandering led him away from the bustling main streets and into the quieter, more labyrinthine side alleys of the city. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that Izuku couldn't appreciate. The shadows stretched long and thin, like grasping fingers. Here, the noise of the city was muffled, replaced by the drip of condensation from an overhead pipe and the distant hum of a building's air conditioning unit. He stopped in one such alley, a narrow canyon of brick and graffiti-stained concrete. He leaned his forehead against the cool, rough wall, the texture a grounding sensation in his disoriented state. His breath hitched, and a dry, ragged sob finally escaped his chest. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a small, pathetic sound, the sound of something breaking deep inside. This was it. The end of the line. For 10 years, ever since that devastating diagnosis, he had clung to a sliver of hope. He had studied heroes, analyzed quirks, filled notebook after notebook with theories and strategies. He had believed, with every fiber of his being, that if he just worked hard enough, if he was just smart enough, if his heart was just heroic enough, it could make up for the genetic lottery he had lost. It was all a lie. A child's fantasy. In this world, you were either born with power, or you were nothing. You were a civilian to be protected, a victim to be pitied, or worst of all, a pebble on the road, kicked aside by those destined for greatness. It is a cruel world that values the potential for violence over the will to save a life. The voice was like silk and steel. It was female, low-pitched, and carried a faint, unplaceable accent. It wasn't loud, yet it cut through the gloom of the alley and the fog in Izuku's mind with surgical precision. He flinched, spinning around. His heart, which he thought couldn't possibly beat any faster, hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He wasn't alone. Standing at the mouth of the alley, silhouetted against the fading light of the street, was a woman. She was tall, poised, and exuded an aura of calm, predatory grace. She wore a simple yet exquisitely tailored dark green pantsuit that spoke of wealth and taste. Her long, dark brown hair was immaculately styled, and her face was one of striking, aristocratic beauty. But it was her eyes that held him captive. They were a piercing emerald green, the same shade as his own, yet they held a depth and ancient wisdom that made him feel like a child being scrutinized by a hawk. She took a slow, deliberate step out of the light and into the shadows with him. The darkness did not consume her. It seemed to welcome her, to wrap around her like a familiar cloak. "Izuku Midoriya," she said, her voice a calm murmur. It wasn't a question. Izuku swallowed, his throat dry and tight. He tried to speak, to ask who she was, but all that came out was a choked squeak. He instinctively took a step back, his back hitting the cold brick wall. Was she a villain? A reporter? She didn't feel like either. There was no chaotic energy of a villain, no pushy eagerness of a journalist. There was only a profound, unsettling stillness. "You have no reason to fear me," she continued, her lips curving into a faint, unreadable smile. She took another step, maintaining a respectful distance, but closing the space enough to make escape feel impossible. "I am not here to harm you. I am here because I saw something remarkable today." Izuku stared, confused. "Remarkable?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Indeed." Her gaze was intense, analytical. "I watched the pro-heroes establish a perimeter, assess the situation, and then hesitate. I watched them weigh the risks to themselves against the life of the hostage. I saw their calculations. And then I saw you." She gestured slightly with one elegant hand. "A boy with no armor, no power, no weapon. A boy who saw another in peril and acted. You did not hesitate. You did not calculate. You simply ran." "Tell me, Izuku Midoriya, why?" The question caught him off guard. It was the same question he'd been asked on the roof. But coming from her, it sounded different. Less like a scolding, more like a genuine inquiry. I don't know," he stammered, the honest, pathetic truth. "My legs, they just started moving." He looked like he needed help. The woman's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Precisely. A pure, unadulterated impulse to save a life. An instinct so powerful it overrode all sense of self-preservation. In a world overflowing with heroes posturing for cameras and cashing endorsement checks, you, a quirkless child, demonstrated more heroism in those 10 seconds than they have in their entire careers." Every word was a balm on his wounded spirit. She saw what he did not as foolishness, but as purity. She saw his weakness as the foundation of a strength he never knew he had. It was intoxicating. It was terrifying. Who are you?" he managed to ask again, his voice a little stronger. "My name is Talia," she said simply. "And like you, I am disappointed in the state of the world. I am an agent for a man who seeks to correct its course, a man who believes that this society, built upon the arbitrary hierarchy of quirks, is fundamentally diseased." She took another slow step forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "Think of what you witnessed today. The heroes were praised for their restraint. The boy with the explosive quirk was praised for his power, despite being the catalyst for the escalation. And you," she paused, her emerald eyes locking onto his, "were chastised for your courage. The system didn't reward the savior. It punished him for not having the correct tools. Does that seem like justice to you?" Izuku's mind reeled. She was articulating the very injustice that had been festering in his gut. He had never dared to think of it so critically, so cynically. To him, heroes were absolute. But she was peeling back the curtain, revealing a flawed, hypocritical machine underneath. He could only shake his head, a small, jerky motion. "No," he whispered. "It's not. My father believes that humanity has become terminally ill, Talia continued, her tone now carrying the weight of profound conviction. And this era of quirks, of so-called heroes and villains, is merely the fever breaking. It is a symptom of a deeper sickness, a lack of balance. Heroes do not solve problems, Izuku. They perpetuate a cycle. They fight villains, causing massive property damage. This creates fear. Fear allows governments to impose more control. The villains escalate their methods to overcome the heroes. The heroes become more powerful, more famous. The cycle continues endlessly, while the world slowly rots from the inside out. She stopped directly in front of him. He could smell a faint, exotic scent on her, like sandalwood and night-blooming jasmine. It was calming and dangerous all at once. My father offers a different path. Not the path of a hero, a glorified celebrity who merely treats the symptoms. He offers the path of a surgeon, one with the strength, the will, and the precision to cut out the cancer, to restore the world to a state of balance. Izuku's breath hitched. This sounded extreme, villainous. Yet, her logic was impeccable, her words weaving a tapestry of sense that his analytical mind couldn't easily dismiss. What are you saying? I am saying. Talia's voice was now barely a whisper, a secret shared only between them in the deepening twilight. That my father has been watching you. Not just today. He has agents everywhere. He is aware of your intellect, your analytical skills, your notebooks filled with brilliant, insightful deconstructions of pro-hero abilities. He sees a mind capable of understanding the system's weaknesses, and today, he saw a spirit willing to sacrifice everything for a just cause. A cold dread mixed with a spark of validation washed over Izuku. Someone had seen his notebooks and not thought they were creepy or pathetic? Someone saw value in his obsessive analysis? My father believes that the perfect heir, the perfect instrument to carry out his will, would not be someone born with immense power. Such a person is always corrupted by it, made arrogant and blind. No, the perfect heir would be someone who understands powerlessness. Someone who has to earn their strength through discipline, intelligence, and unbreakable will. Someone whose spirit is pure, uncorrupted by a quirk. She looked at him, and for the first time, her expression softened with something that looked almost like sympathy, or perhaps, recognition. He sees you, Izuku Midoriya. He sees a brilliant mind, a selfless heart, and a soul that has been crushed by the very world he seeks to save. He sees potential. The word hung in the air between them. Potential. All Might had seen none. The world had seen none. But this mysterious woman and her even more mysterious father, they saw it. What are you offering me? Izuku asked, his voice trembling, not with fear, but with a terrifying, nascent hope. An education, Talia replied smoothly. A chance to leave this life behind. To travel with me to a place where you will be forged. Your body will be honed to the peak of human potential. Your mind will be sharpened into a weapon more deadly than any quirk. You will learn strategy, infiltration, medicine, chemistry, and a dozen forms of martial arts. You will be broken down, stripped of your weaknesses and your sentimentality, and rebuilt into something more. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. My father will give you the power you crave. The power to protect, the power to save. Not just one person from a single villain, but the power to save the entire world from itself. He will make you his apprentice. His heir. Izuku's world tilted on its axis. An heir? Him? The quirkless, useless Deku? It was insane. It was a mad fantasy, more unbelievable than his dream of becoming a hero. But as he looked into Talia's unwavering gaze, he saw no hint of deception. She believed every single word she was saying. His mind flashed with images. His mother's worried face. The taunts of his classmates. Bakugo's explosive fists. All Might's pitying smile turning into a grimace of disappointment. The suffocating sludge, the laughter, the scolding. The absolute, crushing despair of his entire life. What did he have here? Nothing. A dead dream. A future of being a second-class citizen, of watching from the sidelines while others with better genes lived out his fantasy. He could go home, take down his posters, and try to be realistic. He could get a normal job, live a normal life, and die a normal, powerless man, forever haunted by what he could never be. Or, he could take this woman's hand. He could step into the shadows with her and grasp at this insane, dangerous, impossible offer. It was a dark path, he knew it instinctively. Her talk of curing the world and cutting out cancer was chilling. But it was a path that led to strength. It was a path that acknowledged his worth. Why me? He asked, one last, desperate question. There must be others. Stronger people. Strength is not the issue. There are thousands of strong men and women in the world. They are a commodity, Talia explained, a flicker of disdain in her eyes. Will, however, is rare. Your will is exceptional. Your capacity for self-sacrifice is nearly absolute. That cannot be taught. It must be forged in the fires of suffering, and you, Izuku Midoriya, have spent your entire life in the flames. My father does not need another blunt instrument. He needs a scalpel. He needs you. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. The city hummed on, oblivious to the monumental choice being made in this forgotten alley. Izuku looked down at his own trembling hands, the hands that had been too weak to save anyone. Talia was offering to make them strong. He thought of his mother. The pain of leaving her would be immense, a wound that might never heal. But what was the alternative? To stay and let her watch him slowly wither away under the weight of his broken dreams? To be a constant, living reminder of his own failure? Maybe this was a way to truly make her proud. To become someone so strong, so capable, that she would never have to worry about him again. He lifted his head, his tear-filled green eyes meeting her piercing emerald ones. The last vestiges of the hopeful, hero-worshipping boy were dying, replaced by a flicker of cold, desperate resolve. The world of light had cast him out. Perhaps he belonged in the dark. What do I have to do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, but it was the whisper of surrender. Of acceptance. A genuine, triumphant smile finally graced Talia's lips. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly terrifying. First, she said, her voice soft and final, you must die. The boy known as Izuku Midoriya, the crying fanba who chased after heroes, must cease to exist. From his ashes, we will build a man. Izuku closed his eyes, a single, final tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He had no ashes left to give, only an empty space where a dream used to be. Okay, he whispered. The journey back to his apartment was a fugue state. Talia walked beside him, a silent, graceful shadow. No one on the street gave them a second glance. They were just a boy and an older woman walking home. The sheer banality of it was surreal. Talia waited patiently on the street corner as he went inside. You have 1 hour, she had said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Sever your ties. Pack only what is essential. Leave nothing that traces back to us. The moment the apartment door clicked shut behind him, the familiar scent of his mother's cooking and the gentle hum of the refrigerator enveloped him. The normality of it was a physical blow. A wave of guilt so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees washed over him. He was about to shatter this peaceful, loving home. He was about to break his mother's heart. Inko Midoriya was in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune as she stirred a pot on the stove. She turned as he entered, her face breaking into a wide, relieved smile. Izuku! Oh, thank goodness, I was starting to worry. I saw the villain attack on the news, I was so scared. Are you alright? You look pale. Are you hungry? Her words tumbled out in a torrent of motherly love and concern. He couldn't meet her eyes. If he did, he would break. He would confess everything, and the offer would vanish like smoke. I'm fine, Mom, he mumbled, his voice thick. Just tired. It was a long day. Oh, of course, you poor thing. She rushed over, her soft hands checking his forehead for a fever. Well, dinner's almost ready. Go wash up. Your favorite katsudon, to celebrate you being so brave. The word brave was a knife twist. He had been called reckless and foolish. The one person who saw him as brave was the one he was about to betray. Actually, Mom, he started, forcing himself to look at her, to memorize her kind, loving face. Something happened today. An opportunity. He spun the lie with a heavy heart, the fabricated story Talia had provided him. He told her he had been approached by a scout for a very prestigious, very exclusive international academy for gifted students. He said they were impressed by his analytical essays he'd posted online, a half-truth, as he did occasionally post his analyses on obscure hero forums. He told her it was a full scholarship, a chance to study abroad, to see the world, to become someone truly special. Inko's eyes widened, first with disbelief, then with overwhelming pride. Tears welled up in her eyes, but these were tears of joy. "Oh, Izuku! My baby! That's wonderful! An international academy? I always knew you were a genius!" She pulled him into a fierce hug, and Izuku had to bite down on his lips so hard he tasted blood to keep from sobbing. He was a monster. When would you have to leave?" she asked, pulling back, her face beaming. This was the hardest part. "Tonight," he said, the word tasting like ash. It's a very sudden departure. The semester starts immediately. They have a chartered car waiting." Her smile faltered for a second. "Tonight? So soon? But we haven't even had time to prepare, to say goodbye." "I know, Mom. I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. It's the chance of a lifetime. I can't miss it." The pride in her eyes won out over the sadness. She nodded, wiping a tear away. "No, of course not. You're right. Oh, this is so much to take in. We have to pack." In his room, the light felt even more suffocating. The All Might posters on the wall seemed to mock him, their bright, primary colors a stark contrast to the dark path he had chosen. He took a small, durable backpack. What was essential? He packed a few changes of plain, durable clothes. His toothbrush. The meager savings he had in his piggy bank. Then his hands hovered over his desk, over the stack of notebooks. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. His life's work. The physical manifestation of his dead dream. Talia had said his analysis was what caught her father's eye. They weren't a relic of his past. They were the reason for his future. He hesitated, then shoved the most recent notebook into his bag. It was a tool. He had to start thinking of everything as a tool. He left the rest. He left the action figures, the limited edition posters, the Silver Age All Might duvet cover. He left behind the boy who had lived in this room. The final, most painful task was the note. He couldn't just vanish. He had to leave something more permanent than the hastily constructed lie he had told her. He sat at his desk, the cheerful All Might lamp illuminating a single piece of paper. His hands shook as he wrote. "Mom, I'm sorry this is so sudden. The opportunity one told you about is real. It's a chance for me to become someone strong, someone you'll never have to worry about again. I know it will be hard with me being so far away, but please don't be sad. Think of this as me finally finding my path. I'm going to study hard and work harder than anyone. I'm going to make you proud. I promise. I love you more than anything. Love, Izuku." He folded it neatly and left it on his pillow, right where she would find it. The words were all true, from a certain, twisted point of view. And that, he thought, was the cruelest part of all. Saying goodbye at the door was an agony he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Inko hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe, sobbing freely now. "Be safe, my sweet boy. Call me every day. And study hard. Oh, I'm so proud of you, Izuku. I'm so proud." "I will, Mom," he lied. I love you too." He pulled away before he could change his mind, turning and walking out the door without looking back. He walked down the stairs, his legs feeling like lead, his heart a black hole in his chest. Each step took him further away from love, from warmth, from home. Each step took him deeper into the shadows. Talia was waiting for him, leaning against a long, black, unmarked sedan with tinted windows. The car was utterly out of place in their quiet, middle-class neighborhood. It was a sleek, black Predator resting amongst pigeons. She gave him a nod of approval. "You are punctual. A good sign." She opened the rear door for him. The interior was plush leather and polished wood, silent and cool. It was another world. He slid in, placing his meager backpack on the seat beside him. Talia got on the other side, and the door closed with a soft, solid thud, sealing them inside. The sound was like a coffin lid closing. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, silently. Izuku allowed himself one last look back at his apartment building. He could see the light on in their living room window, a tiny, warm square of gold in the vast darkness. His mother was in there, her heart full of pride and hope for a future he would never have. He faced forward, his reflection a pale, ghostly image in the tinted window. The boy staring back was a stranger, his eyes hollowed out, his expression grim. The city lights streaked past, blurring into ribbons of color. He was leaving it all behind. His past, his home, his name. Talia spoke, her voice calm and even, cutting through his silent grief. The first lesson is this: regret is a luxury. It is an indulgence for those with the time to look back. We have no such time. Your life, as you knew it, is over. Look only forward. Izuku said nothing. He just stared at the road ahead, disappearing into the night. He had made his choice in a dark alley, born of despair and a sliver of twisted hope. Now, he had to live with it. The car merged onto the highway, accelerating, carrying the ghost of Izuku Midoriya away from the world of heroes and into the waiting arms of the demon. The world beyond the car's tinted windows was a meaningless, abstract blur. For a time Izuku tried to track their progress, his analytical mind desperately seeking patterns, landmarks, anything to anchor himself in reality. But the journey was designed to disorient, to erase the very concept of a path from here to there. First, there was the long, silent drive to a private airfield on the outskirts of Mizurifu, where the black sedan delivered him to the steps of a sleek, unmarked jet. Inside, the windows were electronically blacked out the moment the door sealed shut. He was alone in the quiet, opulent cabin, served a simple meal by a flight attendant who moved with the silent grace of a predator, and whose eyes held no warmth. He didn't know if he was flying for hours or for days. Time became a fluid, meaningless concept, measured only in the cycles of his own breathing and the dull, persistent ache in his chest where his heart used to be. The jet landed, and he was transferred to a helicopter. The air that blasted him as he crossed the tarmac was different, thinner, colder, and smelling of pine and stone. Again, the windows were blacked out. The roar of the rotors was a physical presence, vibrating through his bones, shaking loose the last remnants of the boy he had been. He felt the helicopter ascending, a gut-wrenching climb that went on for an impossibly long time, the air pressure changing until his ears popped again and again. When the motion finally ceased, the door slid open not to a tarmac, but to a cavernous hangar carved directly into the face of a mountain. The air that greeted him was thin and brutally cold, a blade of ice in his lungs. Men in simple, dark gray fatigues, their faces impassive, guided him out. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya. He was cargo, delivered to its final destination. He was led onto a wide stone balcony, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he was allowed to see where he was. The sight stole the breath from his already oxygen-starved lungs. He stood on the precipice of the world. He was nestled in a wound carved into the world's highest flesh, a fortress that seemed less built and more grown from the living rock of a colossal mountain. All around him, a jagged tiara of snow-dusted peaks clawed at a sky of the deepest, most unforgiving blue he had ever seen. The sun was a brilliant, merciless diamond, casting sharp, black shadows across the stone. Below, clouds swirled like a vast, white ocean, obscuring whatever lay in the abyss beneath. There was no sign of civilization, no roads, no cities, nothing but the raw, majestic, and terrifying power of nature. The silence was absolute, a heavy, sacred thing broken only by the mournful cry of the wind as it whipped through the crenellations of the fortress. This place had a name, Talia had told him, a name spoken only in whispers in the darkest corners of the world, Nanda Parbat. The culture shock was a physical blow, more jarring than any punch Bakugo had ever thrown. His world had been one of concrete and glass, of cheerful jingles and the constant, reassuring hum of a technologically advanced society. This place was ancient, austere, and brutal. It felt like stepping back 1,000 years into a history written in blood and stone. This way, Ibn al-Ghul. The voice belonged to one of his escorts. He spoke in a language Izuku didn't recognize, but the title, he understood. Son of the Demon. It wasn't his name. It was a brand. He was led from the balcony into the fortress proper. The corridors were vast, hewn from the same dark, cold stone as the mountain's exterior. The only light came from flickering braziers that cast long, dancing shadows, making the walls seem to breathe. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, cold stone, and something else, something metallic and vaguely coppery, like old blood. They passed a vast, open-air courtyard. Here, the silence was broken. Not by conversation or laughter, but by the rhythmic thud of wood against wood, the whistle of blades cutting through the air, and the sharp, percussive slap of flesh on flesh. Dozens of men and women, all clad in simple, black, sleeveless GIs, trained with a deadly seriousness that made Izuku's blood run cold. They moved with a fluid economy of motion he had never witnessed. There were no flashy, signature moves like the pro heroes he idolized. There was no Texas smash or California smash. There was only efficiency. A swift strike to the throat, a brutal joint lock that ended with a sickening crack. A thrown knife that embedded itself in the dead center of a target 100 feet away with a soft thwip. Izuku's analytical mind, his one constant companion, kicked into overdrive, trying to process the flood of new data. He saw styles he could vaguely recognize from old martial arts films, but they were different here, stripped of all artistry, refined into pure, lethal function. They weren't training to incapacitate or apprehend. They were training to kill. A woman disarmed a man twice her size, broke his arm at the elbow, and drove the heel of her palm into his nose with 3 precise, flowing movements that took less than a second. The man simply reset his own arm with a grunt of pain and resumed his fighting stance. There was no ego here. No posturing. No taunts. Just the silent, relentless pursuit of perfection in the craft of death. Izuku watched, a knot of terror and a strange, academic fascination tightening in his stomach. He had spent his life analyzing how heroes won. He was now in a place dedicated to the study of how people die. His escorts led him onward, deeper into the mountain's heart. They finally stopped before a pair of immense, intricately carved wooden doors flanked by 2 silent, masked guards holding wickedly curved scythes. The guards gave a subtle nod, and the doors swung inward without a sound. "The demon's head will see you now," his guide said in perfect, unaccented Japanese, the change in language a clear signal of the formality of the moment. "Enter." Alone, Izuku swallowed, his throat feeling like sandpaper. He took a hesitant step, then another, crossing the threshold into the throne room. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in the shadows far above. A cavernous silence pressed in on him. The only light emanated from a large, circular fire pit in the center of the room, its flames casting a warm, flickering glow on ancient tapestries that lined the walls. They depicted scenes of conquest, of shadows spreading across maps of the world, of a single, hooded figure standing triumphant over kings and armies throughout history. At the far end of the chamber, upon a simple dais of carved stone, sat a throne. And on the throne sat a man. He appeared old yet ageless. His face was a roadmap of centuries, lined with wisdom and cruelty in equal measure. A sharp, pointed goatee and mustache gave him an aristocratic, almost regal air. He wore robes of deep green and black, embroidered with the image of a dragon. But it was his eyes that held Izuku rooted to the spot. They were the same startling, penetrating emerald green as Talia's, as his own, but they burned with a cold, ancient fire. They were the eyes of a man who had seen civilizations rise and fall, who had measured the worth of empires and found them wanting. They looked at Izuku not as a boy, but as an equation to be solved, a tool to be assessed. This was the demon's head. This was Raz al Ghul. "Izuku Midoriya," Raz spoke. His voice was not loud, but it filled the cavernous hall, echoing slightly off the stone. It was a voice accustomed to absolute, unquestioning obedience. "You have traveled far. You have left behind the world of children and entered the world of consequence. Approach." Izuku's legs felt like lead, but they obeyed the command, carrying him forward until he stood a respectful distance from the dais. He didn't know the protocol. Should he bow? Kneel? He settled for standing as straight as he could, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, trying desperately not to tremble. Raz al Ghul's gaze swept over him, and Izuku felt utterly transparent, as if the man could see every fear, every doubt, every broken dream rattling around inside his soul. "My daughter tells me you possess a remarkable spirit," Raz continued, his tone conversational, yet carrying the weight of a final judgment. She tells me she saw a fire in you that the so-called heroes of your world have long since extinguished in themselves. A fire of pure, selfless will. I, however, was more interested in your mind. He gestured to a small, ornate table beside his throne. Lying upon it was a familiar, slightly scorched notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. Izuku's blood went cold. How did he get that? Do not be alarmed, Raz said, a thin, knowing smile gracing his lips. My reach is long. I have read your work. It is fascinating. You do not see heroes. You see systems. You see attack patterns, support gear limitations, quirk recovery times, psychological weaknesses. You deconstruct these modern gods into their component parts. These are not the scribblings of a fan boy. This is the scripture of weakness. A catalogue of flaws. In your own, innocent way, you have been doing my work for years. The praise was so unexpected, so profound, that it left Izuku speechless. The very thing Bakugo had mocked, the thing he had been ashamed of, this terrifying man was lauding as a work of strategic genius. Your world is sick, Raz stated, his voice losing its conversational tone and taking on the hard edge of ancient conviction. It has been for a very long time. Humanity is a beautiful, self-destructive child, squandering a paradise it did not earn. For centuries I have been the surgeon, the detective who identifies the cancers and excises them to preserve the whole. Wars, plagues, economic collapses, sometimes, a limb must be sacrificed to save the body. It is a grim, thankless task, but a necessary one. He leaned forward slightly, his burning eyes fixed on Izuku. But then came the dawn of quirks. A global pandemic of unearned chaotic power. It accelerated the sickness. It created a world of false idols, where strength is mistaken for virtue. Your symbol of peace, he is the most dangerous of them all. He does not stop the cycle. He is the engine that drives it. For every villain he punches through a building, he inspires a dozen more to rise up and challenge him, and 1,000 fools to believe that punching is the solution to all the world's problems. He is not a savior. He is a symptom. Izuku felt a wave of sacrilegious horror. To hear All Might, his god, spoken of with such contempt, yet, he couldn't entirely dismiss the chilling logic. He had seen it himself, the system that praised Bakugo for his power and punished him for his heart. I have searched for centuries for a worthy successor, Raz went on, rising from his throne. He moved with a silent, fluid grace that belied his apparent age. He descended the steps of the dais and began to circle Izuku like a shark. I have had children, students, followers. They have all, in their own way, disappointed. They were too ambitious, too weak, too consumed by their own power. They could not see the grand design. They could not see the world as I see it. He stopped directly behind Izuku, his voice a low whisper by his ear. But you were born without power. You have starved for it. You understand its value, its cost, in a way that those born with it never can. Your will was not a gift from your genes. It was forged in the crucible of mockery and despair. Your mind was not dulled by the easy reliance on a quirk. It was sharpened to a razor's edge by necessity. You are a blank slate, uncorrupted by the disease you are destined to cure. Raz moved back into Izuku's line of sight, his expression one of absolute certainty. That is why you are here. The world does not need another hero with another flashy quirk. It needs a mind that can command armies. It needs a will that can reshape nations. It needs an heir who understands that true salvation sometimes requires terrible sacrifice. The air in the room was thick with the weight of his words. Izuku's head was spinning. An heir. This man, this immortal, terrifying king of shadows, wanted him. The quirkless, useless Deku. It was a destiny so grand, so terrifying, it dwarfed his childish dreams of being a hero. Before we can build, Raz said, his tone shifting again, becoming hard practical, the voice of a master craftsman addressing his raw material. We must first destroy. Everything that you were is a liability, the crying child who desperately sought the approval of others. The fanba who worshipped false gods. The weakling who allowed others to give him a name like Deku. That boy must die in this mountain. He must be scoured from your soul, leaving only the foundation upon which we will build his replacement. He raised a hand and pointed a single, imperious finger at Izuku. From this moment forward, you will not answer to the name Izuku Midoriya. That name is dead. Here, in your training, you will be known as Ibn al-Ghul, son of the demon. It is a title of potential, a statement of purpose. You will carry it until the day you earn a true name of your own, a name that will be whispered in fear and reverence from the shadows of Gotham to the gleaming towers of Tokyo. Do you understand? Izuku's throat was tight. His old life, his old name, was being formally stripped from him. He was being unmade. There was no going back. There was only this cold, dark, terrifying path forward. He looked into the ancient, emerald eyes of Ras Al Ghul, the only man in the world who had ever looked at him and seen not a failure, but the future. He gave a single, sharp nod. Yes, he managed to say, his voice a dry rasp. Good, Ras said, the thin smile returning. Then your first lesson begins now. Come. Ras turned and swept from the room, his robes rustling like dry leaves. Izuku, now Ibn al-Ghul, hesitated for only a second before following him, a lost soul trailing in the wake of a god of death. He was led through another series of winding, torchlit corridors. The air grew warmer, humid, and thick with a strange, electric energy that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The smell of ozone and ancient, damp earth filled his nostrils, mixed with something else, something primal and unsettlingly alive. They arrived in a circular chamber, smaller and more intimate than the throne room. It was carved from a different kind of rock, a pale, greenish stone that seemed to glow with a faint, internal luminescence. The entire room was dominated by a sunken, circular pool in its center. The pool was filled with a viscous, bubbling liquid the color of liquid emeralds. A faint, sickly green steam rose from its surface, coiling in the air like spectral snakes. The light from the pool cast an eerie, underwater glow on Ras Al Ghul's face, making his features seem even more demonic and ancient. Izuku stared at the pool, mesmerized and repulsed. It felt wrong. It felt like looking at something that violated the fundamental laws of nature. Behold, Ras said, his voice a reverent hush. He spread his arms wide, gesturing to the pool as a king would display his most prized treasure. The secret of my longevity. The source of my rebirth, the fountain of my wrath. Others call it a miracle. We call it the Lazarus Pit. Izuku's eyes widened. Lazarus. The man from the pre-quirk religious texts who was raised from the dead. It is a confluence of the world's ley lines, Ras explained, his gaze fixed on the pit's churning surface. A unique chemical and energy soup that can heal any wound, cure any disease. It can even snatch a soul back from the precipice of death itself. I have bathed in its waters more times than I can count. I have died and been reborn in its embrace, my body made whole, my life extended far beyond the petty span allotted to mortal men. He turned his gaze back to Izuku, and there was a dangerous, fanatical gleam in his eyes. This is power, boy. True power. Not a genetic accident that allows a man to shoot explosions from his hands. This is the power to command life and death. The power to defy creation itself. Izuku could feel the raw energy emanating from the pit, a humming vibration that seemed to sink into his bones. It was terrifying. It was seductive. But such power, Ras continued, his voice dropping to a low, cautionary tone, always comes with a price. The waters heal the body, but they can damage the mind. Each rebirth leaves a scar upon the soul. The first moments after emerging are a fever of madness, of rage. It takes a will of iron to pull oneself back from that abyss. Many have failed. They emerge as little more than feral, mindless beasts. He walked to the very edge of the pit, looking down into its glowing, emerald depths as if gazing upon the face of his one true God. This pit is the heart of the League of Assassins. It is a symbol of our philosophy. That from death comes new life. That for true, lasting order to be born, the old, corrupt world must be burned away and rebuilt from the ashes. It is the cycle of destruction and creation, of death and rebirth. He finally looked at Izuku, his expression intense and unreadable. You will not be using the pit today. You have not earned that right. Your body is unbroken, your life is not in peril. But I want you to look at it. I want you to feel its power. I want you to understand what awaits you at the end of your training. This is the ultimate tool. The ultimate reward. The ultimate promise. Izuku stepped closer, drawn by a morbid curiosity he couldn't resist. He peered over the edge, into the swirling green abyss. He saw his own reflection looking back, but it was distorted, warped by the bubbling liquid. The boy in the reflection looked terrified, lost, and frail. Then, for a fleeting, heart-stopping second, the reflection shifted. The face was older, harder, the eyes cold and merciless. Scars traced patterns on the skin, and the expression was one of absolute, chilling confidence. It was the face of a killer. The face of a king. He recoiled as if burned, stumbling back a step, his heart hammering in his chest. Ras Al Ghul watched him with a flicker of amusement. You see, he murmured. The pit shows you not what you are, but what you can become. This was it. The final, undeniable truth. This was his point of no return. The rooftop with all might had been the death of a dream. This chamber, at the heart of a mountain at the top of the world, was the death of his very self. He had accepted an offer in a shadowy alley, but he had not truly understood the price. The price was his soul. He looked from the terrifying promise of the Lazarus pit back to the man who commanded it. Ras Al Ghul, the demon's head. His new master. His new father. His training would not just be physical. It would not just be mental. It would be a complete and total deconstruction of his being. They would break him, scour him, and forge him into a weapon in their image, and if he survived, if he proved worthy, he would one day command this power himself. He would be reborn from that emerald fire, a new being, leaving the last vestiges of the kind, heroic boy from Muzidafu to be dissolved in its maddening waters forever. Izuku stood before the Lazarus pit, a quirkless child who had only ever wanted to save people, and understood that to do so, he would first have to become a monster. And in the deepest, most broken part of his heart, a terrifying thought took root. Maybe it's worth it. Time in Nanda Parbat did not flow. It was chiseled away, one painful sliver at a time. The rising and setting of the merciless sun was the only clock, and the changing seasons, marked by the deepening of the snow on the peaks and the increased ferocity of the wind, were the only calendar. For the boy once known as Izuku Midoriya, now called only Ibn al-Ghul, the first year was a blur of agony, a constant, grinding process of being broken down to his constituent parts. His life was reduced to a simple, brutal trinity: pain, exhaustion, and learning. It began in the training courtyard, a vast, open-air expanse of packed earth and unforgiving stone. Here, sentimentality was the first casualty. His instructors were not teachers in any sense he understood. They were sculptors, and he was the marble. They communicated not with words of encouragement, but with the sharp crack of a wooden staff against his ribs, the stinging slap of a palm against his face, the numbing impact of a fist that drove the air from his lungs. His first sparring session was against a man named Kenjiro, a mountain of muscle and scar tissue with eyes as dead and cold as the surrounding peaks. Izuku, still physically a boy, was given a simple instruction: survive. He tried to use his mind, his one and only asset. He analyzed Kenjiro's stance, the way he distributed his weight, the slight twitch in his left shoulder that telegraphed a jab. He saw the opening. He moved to exploit it. The result was a searing flash of pain as Kenjiro's foot swept his legs out from under him. He hit the packed earth with a jarring thud, his head bouncing off the ground. Before he could even register the impact, Kenjiro was on him, a knee pinning his chest, a forearm pressing against his throat. The pressure was immense, crushing. Black spots danced in his vision. He scrabbled uselessly at the man's arm, his movements frantic and weak. You saw the opening, a calm voice observed from the edge of the courtyard. It was Talia. She watched his humiliation with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. Your analysis was correct. Your body, however, was too slow, too weak to capitalize on it. Your mind and your flesh are not in harmony. Here, we will force them into unison. Kenjiro released the pressure, and Izuku gasped, pulling in ragged, desperate breaths that felt like swallowing fire. He didn't have time to recover. Kenjiro hauled him to his feet, and the lesson resumed. Day after day, it was the same. He was beaten, thrown, and choked until his body was a single, throbbing bruise. He learned to fall, to roll with a blow to dissipate its force, to absorb pain until it was just a dull, constant background noise. He learned that crying out only earned him a harsher lesson. The tears that had once come so easily to Izuku Midoriya dried up, burned away by the fires of ceaseless agony. He learned to swallow his pain, to lock it away in a cold, dark place deep inside him. The physical breaking was only the first layer. Next came the forging. His body, once soft and unremarkable, was systematically remade. Mornings began before the sun, with grueling runs along treacherous mountain paths where a single misstep meant a 1,000-foot fall. The thin, oxygen-poor air burned his lungs, but he ran until his legs were screaming jelly and his vision wavered. He performed thousands of push-ups on his knuckles on the frozen stone, thousands of sit-ups, thousands of pull-ups from icy ledges, until the muscles in his scrawny frame tore themselves apart and rebuilt, stronger, denser, and more efficient. He was no longer just training. He was being re-engineered into a living weapon. After the conditioning came the art. He learned the silent, deadly grace of ninjutsu, the brutal efficiency of Krav Maga, the flowing power of Kung Fu, the crippling joint locks of Aikido. He studied dozens of forms, his analytical mind finally finding purchase. He didn't just mimic the movements, he deconstructed them. He saw the physics of a perfect punch, the geometry of a disarming maneuver, the biology of a nerve strike. His old notebooks, filled with sketches of heroes, were replaced by his mind, which now saw the human body as a collection of levers, fulcrums, and pressure points. Swordsmanship was taught by Ras Al Ghul himself. In a private, torchlit dojo, the demon's head would school him in the art of the blade. A sword is not a club, Ibn al-Ghul, Ras said during their first lesson, holding a perfectly balanced katana. Its steel seemed to drink the light. The brutes your world calls heroes swing their fists with the subtlety of a falling mountain. They are agents of chaos. We are agents of order. This, he said, holding the blade aloft, is an instrument of precision. It is a surgeon's scalpel, used to excise a cancer with minimal damage to the surrounding tissue. Every movement must have purpose. Every strike must be a conclusion. Izuku, his hands trembling slightly, held a wooden bakken. Under Raz's tutelage, he practiced the same basic forms for months. The vertical cut. The horizontal slash. The thrust. Over and over, until his shoulders burned and his hands were raw with blisters. Raz was a merciless teacher. A sloppy parry would earn a sharp rap on the knuckles from the flat of his blade. A poorly balanced stance would result in him being swept to the floor. Your sentimentality makes you hesitate, Raz chided him one evening, after Izuku flinched from a particularly aggressive thrust. You fear the blade. You fear the finality of what it represents. You must not. You must see it as an extension of your will. It has no morality. It has no malice. It is a tool. And a tool is only as righteous as the hand that wields it. Pain tolerance was a subject unto itself. He was taught to meditate for hours in the snow, wearing only thin cotton pants, focusing his mind until the biting cold was a distant sensation. He was taught to set his own dislocated shoulder, to stitch a gash in his own arm without flinching, his hands guided by an instructor who watched with impassive eyes. He learned that pain was merely a signal from the body, and like any signal, it could be analyzed, understood, and ultimately ignored. The boy who had cried from a scraped knee was a ghost, a faint, pathetic memory from another lifetime. While his body was being broken and reforged, his mind was being sharpened on a whetstone of ancient, forbidden knowledge. Nanda Parbat housed a library that was one of the wonders of the hidden world. It was a vast, circular chamber, shelves carved into the stone walls from floor to ceiling, filled with scrolls and leather-bound books that chronicled a version of human history that would never be taught in schools. Here, with Ras Al Ghul as his personal tutor, Izuku's education truly began. He devoured knowledge with the same desperation he had once reserved for hero news. He learned a dozen languages, both living and dead. He studied military strategy from the texts of Sun Tzu to the secret campaigns of the League of Assassins throughout the centuries. He learned chemistry, not to pass an exam, but to concoct nerve agents from common household cleaners and synthesize antidotes from rare mountain herbs. He studied biology, not to understand life, but to master death, learning the precise locations of every artery, nerve cluster, and vital organ in the human body. Raz would sit with him for hours, a tapestry depicting the burning of the Library of Alexandria behind them. History is written by the victors, Ibn al-Ghul, Raz would say, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. But it is shaped by the shadows. The fall of Rome, the Black Death, the rise and fall of empires, they were not accidents. They were corrections. Culls. Necessary adjustments to keep humanity from consuming itself. We were there for all of them. Guiding. Pruning. Ensuring the survival of the species, even when it meant the death of millions. He drilled the League's ideology into Izuku's mind relentlessly. It was a philosophy of cold, brutal arithmetic. The needs of the planet outweighed the needs of a nation. The needs of the species outweighed the needs of a city. The death of one to save 1,000 was not murder. It was salvation. Your heroes are a lie, Raz explained one evening, as they looked over a holographic map of the world, dotted with points of conflict. They are a comforting fantasy for a species that has grown too soft. They fight the symptoms, the garish villains, the street-level thugs, while the true diseases fester unchecked. Corporate greed that poisons the earth. Corrupt politicians who starve their own people. Ideologies that drive nations to war. Does your All Might punch these things? No. He punches a man in a costume, smiles for the camera, and the world celebrates, blind to the cancer that grows in its own heart. Izuku listened, and the cold logic of it seeped into his bones. His old worldview, a simple binary of good heroes and evil villains, crumbled. He began to see the world as Raz saw it, a complex, broken system that required not a symbol, but a solution. His notebooks, once filled with analysis of heroes' quirks, were now filled with coded notes on global supply chains, political dynasties, and the tactical weaknesses of entire nations. The final piece of his old self they sought to destroy was his heart. His empathy, his compassion, his useless sentimentality, as Raz called it. Emotion is a vulnerability. His meditation instructor, a silent monk named Master O-sensei, would communicate through gestures. It clouds judgment. It creates hesitation. A warrior who pities his enemy is already dead. He was forced to watch footage of war, of famine, of suffering, until he could do so without flinching. He was tested constantly. During a tracking exercise he would find a wounded deer, its leg caught in a trap. His instinct was to help it, but his instructions were to observe the predator that would inevitably find it, to learn from it. Pity was a distraction from the lesson. He learned to harden his heart, to build walls around the compassionate boy he used to be, until that boy's voice was just a faint, desperate whisper from behind a fortress of cold, hard logic. But the whisper was still there. And it was that whisper that led to his greatest failure, and his most profound lesson. He was 13 years old. 3 years of relentless training had transformed him. The scrawny, freckled boy was gone, replaced by a lean, wiry youth. His body was a roadmap of faint, silvery scars. His eyes, once wide and hopeful, were now sharp, analytical, and shadowed with a weariness far beyond his years. He moved with a quiet confidence and a lethal grace. He was Ibn al-Ghul, but he was not yet a killer. Raz al-Ghul summoned him to the training courtyard. In the center, kneeling with his hands bound behind his back, was a member of the League. His face was bloodied and swollen, but his eyes were wide with terror. "This man is a traitor," Raz announced, his voice echoing in the cold, still air. The other assassins formed a silent circle, their faces impassive masks. "He sold information of our movements to a rival organization. His actions led to the deaths of 3 of his brothers." The man began to sob. "Please, master. Mercy. I have a family. A daughter." Raz looked at the man with utter contempt. "Your family is the League. You betrayed them. There is no mercy for traitors." He then turned his gaze to Izuku. A member of the League handed Izuku a short, razor-sharp sword. The steel was cold and heavy in his hand. "You have excelled in your training, Ibn al-Ghul," Raz said, his voice level. "You have mastered the forms. You understand the theory. But theory is meaningless without practice. The final lesson is always the hardest. Execute him." The world seemed to shrink to the space between him and the kneeling man. The wind died. The torches crackled. The man's desperate, pleading eyes locked onto his. A daughter. The words echoed in Izuku's mind. He saw a little girl waiting for a father who would never come home. He raised the sword. His muscles, honed by years of training, obeyed the command without hesitation. The blade was poised perfectly, ready to deliver a clean, swift death. His mind told him this was logical. The man was a traitor. His continued existence was a liability. His death was justice, according to the laws of this place, but his heart screamed. The whisper of Izuku Midoriya, the boy who ran to save Bakugo, the boy who wanted to save everyone with a smile, became a deafening roar in his ears. This wasn't saving anyone, this was murder. His hands trembled. The tip of the sword wavered. Do it, boy, Raz commanded, his voice like a shard of ice. Izuku looked at the man's terrified face, and he saw not a traitor, but a human being. He couldn't. He just couldn't. With a choked cry, he lowered the sword, letting the tip fall to the ground. I can't, he whispered, the words tasting like failure. A heavy silence fell over the courtyard. The assassins watched, their expressions unreadable. The traitor looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Raz al Ghul did not rage. He did not yell. He simply sighed, a sound of profound, weary disappointment. As I thought, he said softly. The old weakness still lingers. He strode forward, taking the sword from Izuku's unresisting hand. He moved with a grace that was almost beautiful. In one fluid, practiced motion, he stepped behind the traitor and drew the blade across his throat. There was a soft, wet sound, and a spray of crimson painted the packed earth. The traitor's body went rigid, then slumped forward, life gushing from him in a torrent. Izuku stared, his eyes wide with horror. The scent of fresh, hot blood filled the air. A wave of nausea rolled through him, and he stumbled back, turning away to retch, his stomach heaving up the meager contents of his breakfast. When he finished, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, Raz was standing before him, cleaning the blade on a piece of cloth. Your sentimentality did not save him, Raz said, his voice calm and instructive, as if he were explaining a point of philosophy. It only prolonged his terror. A clean, swift death is a mercy. You offered him only fear. That is not compassion. That is cruelty. He sheathed the blade and placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. His touch was not comforting, it was possessive. Listen to me, Ibn al-Ghul, and listen well. That man's betrayal was not a simple act of greed. The information he sold was the location of a small, hidden infirmary in Cairo where we treat our wounded. Because of him, that infirmary was attacked. 2 of our best medics and the 3 wounded assassins they were treating were slaughtered. The medics had families. The assassins had families. 5 lives extinguished. That traitor's daughter will grow up without a father. Now 5 other children will grow up without fathers or mothers because of his weakness. He gripped Izuku's shoulder tighter, forcing the boy to look him in the eye. I offer you a simple equation. His 1 life, weighed against the 5 that were lost, and the countless more that would be lost if his treachery went unpunished. What is the logical, the just course of action? To spare the one, and allow the cancer to spread? Or to excise it, to cut out the sickness so the body may live? He stared into Raz's ancient, emerald eyes, and he saw no malice, no cruelty. He saw only a terrible, unshakable certainty. The cold arithmetic of the greater good. Your desire to save people is a noble fire, boy, Raz concluded, his voice softening slightly. But you must learn to direct it. You cannot save everyone. To try is the folly of a child. You must learn to choose who is worth saving. And sometimes, to save the innocent, you must be willing to eliminate the guilty. The death of one to save 1,000 is not murder. It is the highest form of salvation. Do you understand? Izuku stood there, the coppery smell of blood in his nostrils, the image of the dying man seared into his brain. He felt something inside him break. The last vestiges of Izuku Midoriya's black and white world shattered into a million shades of gray. He understood. He hated that he understood, but the logic was a cage, and it was closing around his heart. He gave a slow, stiff nod. Raz released him. Good. You will meditate on this lesson. You have failed today. Do not fail again. That night, Izuku did not sleep. He sat in his Spartan cell, staring at his hands. They had refused to take a life, and because of that refusal, Raz had shown him that inaction was its own form of action, that mercy could be a form of cruelty. The conflict inside him was a raging storm, but he knew, with a chilling certainty, which side would win. The League's logic was absolute. The world was a broken, bleeding thing, and a surgeon could not afford to have trembling hands. A year passed. He was 14. He had not been tested in that way again, but he knew it was coming. He was harder now, colder. The memory of the execution was a scar on his soul, a constant reminder of his lesson. The whisper of the boy he once was had fallen silent. The summons came. It was not to the courtyard, but to the throne room. Talia was there, standing beside her father's throne. The time for lessons is over, Ibn al-Ghul, Raz announced. It is time for your final examination. A holographic map appeared in the air between them, showing a sprawling, opulent estate in the south of France. This is the home of Jean-Pierre Dubois, Talia explained, her voice crisp and professional. An international arms dealer. He has recently made a deal to supply a new form of untraceable, quirk-disrupting weaponry to two warring factions in Eastern Europe. His weapons will escalate the conflict, destabilize the region, and lead to the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians. The governments of the world are either too slow, too corrupt, or too cowardly to act, Raz continued. So we will. You will infiltrate his estate during a gala he is hosting in 3 days' time. You will get close to him. And you will eliminate him. But you will not do it with a sword or a gun. That is the work of a common thug. You are to be an artist of death. You will make it look like an accident, a tragic consequence of his own decadent lifestyle. No trace must lead back to the League. He was given a dossier, a new identity, and a set of tools. His mission was not a test of strength, but of intellect, stealth, and will. 3 days later, Izuku was no longer Ibn al-Ghul. He was Haruki Tanaka, the quiet, unassuming son of a wealthy Japanese tech mogul. A new investor Dubois was eager to court. Dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, he moved through the glittering, champagne-fueled party with an unnatural calm. He was a ghost in the machine, he observed. He analyzed. He saw the placement of the guards, the blind spots in the security cameras, the patterns of the servers. He saw Dubois, a loud, corpulent man with a politician's smile and a predator's eyes. Using a carefully constructed excuse, he slipped away from the party and into the private wing of the mansion. He moved through the shadows with a silence that was absolute. He disabled a guard with a single, precise nerve strike to the neck that would leave him unconscious for hours with nothing more than a headache. He found Dubois's private bathroom. Inside the medicine cabinet was a bottle of heart medication. Izuku's research had told him the man had a weak heart, a fact his doctors had been paid handsomely to keep private. He produced a small vial from his pocket. It contained a clear, odorless liquid, a highly concentrated chemical derived from a rare species of mountain flower found only on Nanda Parbat. It was a potent cardiac stimulant, harmless in small doses, but when mixed with Dubois's specific medication, it would trigger a massive, irreversible coronary event. It would be a tragedy. A heart attack. Nothing more. He carefully added 3 drops to the bottle, resealed it, and wiped it clean of his prints. His work took less than a minute. He slipped back out, melting into the party as if he had never left. An hour later, as he was making his polite excuses to leave, a scream echoed from the upper floor. Panic erupted. Jean-Pierre Dubois had been found dead. A tragic accident. Izuku walked out of the estate, his expression calm, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. He felt no pride. No remorse. No guilt. He felt nothing. A profound, chilling hollowness. A problem had been identified. A solution had been implemented. A variable had been eliminated from the equation. That was all. When he returned to Nanda Parbat, he went directly to the throne room. He knelt before Raz al-Ghul, his head bowed. "It is done," he said, his voice flat. Raz al-Ghul descended from his throne and stood before him. For a long moment he said nothing, simply studying the boy, no, the young man, kneeling before him. He saw the cold efficiency in his eyes, the absence of conflict. He saw the successful conclusion of his 5-year project. "You have shed your weakness," Raz said, his voice resonating with satisfaction. "You have embraced the logic of our crusade. You have finally become the tool you were destined to be. Rise." Izuku rose to his feet. "The title Ibn al-Ghul no longer suits you," Raz declared. "It is a title of becoming. You have now become. You need a name of your own. A name that honors your past, while defining your future. The color of your eyes, of your hair, a reflection of the pit from which all our power flows. You shall be known as Al-Actor." He placed a hand on Izuku's head, a gesture that was almost paternal. "Al-Actor," Raz repeated, letting the name settle in the air. "The Green One. Rise, Al-Actor. Rise, my heir." Izuku lifted his head. He caught his reflection in the polished black marble of the floor. He saw a stranger staring back. A boy with an old man's eyes, a killer's stillness, and a hollow space where his heart used to be. The freckles on his cheeks were the only faint reminder of the child he had been. The forging was complete. The crying, hero-obsessed boy named Izuku Midoriya was well and truly dead. In his place stood Al-Actor, the chosen heir of the demon's head. A perfect, silent, deadly weapon, waiting for his master to point him at the world. The world Izuku Midoriya returned to was not the one he had left. Or perhaps, the world was the same, and it was he who was the alien, a creature from a distant, harsher star set down in a land of bright colors and loud, meaningless noises. The journey back was the reverse of his departure, a series of unmarked vehicles, clandestine airfields, and sterile private jets, all designed to leave no trace. He stepped off the final bullet train at Muzutafa's central station, not as the demon's heir, Al-Actor, but as Izuku Midoriya, a 15-year-old boy returning from a 5-year, intensive study abroad program in Switzerland. The cover story was meticulous, supported by a digital footprint of falsified school records, travel documents, and even a carefully curated, private social media profile showing pictures of him against alpine backdrops, images expertly crafted by the League's technological artisans. To the world, he was simply a gifted student coming home. He wore a simple, dark gray hoodie, jeans, and his old, worn-out red sneakers, which Talia had insisted he keep. It was a calculated piece of nostalgia, a tether to the identity he was now meant to inhabit. The clothes felt strange, flimsy and soft after years of wearing the durable, utilitarian GIs of Nanda Parbat. He carried a single, unassuming black backpack containing a change of clothes, his new forged identity documents, a burner phone, and a set of lockpicks that looked like collar stays. The city was an assault on his senses. After years in the profound, sacred silence of the mountain, the cacophony of Muzutafa was a physical blow. The roar of traffic, the cheerful, incessant jingles of storefronts, the overlapping chatter of 1,000 simultaneous conversations. It was a chaotic, undisciplined roar. His senses, honed to detect the whisper of a footstep on stone from 100 yards away, were overwhelmed. He had to consciously filter the tidal wave of sensory input, focusing his breathing, centering himself as he had been taught, to keep from being paralyzed by the sheer volume of it all. The people were the most jarring. They ambled, they slouched, they moved with a shocking lack of awareness of their surroundings, their faces buried in their phones, their postures open and vulnerable. He saw 100 openings, 1,000 weaknesses in the crowd around him. A man with his wallet sticking carelessly out of his back pocket. A woman whose expensive purse strap could be cut with a single, swift motion. A hero wannabe posturing for a selfie, utterly oblivious to the flow of the crowd around him. It was a world of sheep, utterly unprepared for wolves. He walked through the familiar streets of his childhood, but there was no sense of homecoming. The old candy store on the corner, the park where he used to watch Bakugo show off his quirk, the underpass where he had been attacked by the sludge villain. They were not places of memory, but tactical locations. The park had good sight lines but limited cover. The underpass was a natural choke point, an ambush site. His mind, rewired by years of training, could no longer see a home. It saw only a battlefield. His apartment building was unchanged, a humble, beige structure that seemed impossibly fragile after the stone fortress of Nanda Parbat. He walked up the 3 flights of stairs, his footsteps making no sound. He stopped before the familiar green door with the Midoriya nameplate. For the first time since his return, he felt a flicker of something other than detached analysis. A knot of apprehension, a ghost of an emotion he could no longer name. He raised his hand to knock, then paused. He listened. He could hear the soft hum of the television inside, the gentle clink of a teacup being set on a saucer. He could hear the soft, rhythmic breathing of his mother. He took a deep, centering breath, purging the flicker of emotion, and knocked. The sound of shuffling feet, a muffled "Coming!" And then the door opened. Inko Midoriya was older. The 5 years had been kind to her, but he could see new lines of worry etched around her eyes, a few more strands of silver in her dark hair. She was holding a watering can, a gentle, domestic image that felt like it belonged to another universe. She looked at him, her expression one of polite confusion, and then her eyes, his eyes, widened. The watering can slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor and splashing water across the welcome mat. Izuku? She whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. It was the first time he had heard his own name in 5 years. It sounded alien, a label for a person who no longer existed. "Hello, Mom," he said. His voice was different now, deeper, and devoid of the nervous energy it once had. It was calm, level, and controlled. The dam of 5 years of pent-up emotion broke. With a strangled sob, Inko threw her arms around him, pulling him into a hug so fierce it should have hurt. She was sobbing into his shoulder, her entire body shaking, repeating his name over and over like a prayer. "Izuku, oh my baby, you're home, you're really home!" For a moment, the boy he was supposed to be, the boy he was playing, almost broke character. The familiar scent of his mother, the unconditional love in her embrace, it was a powerful, disorienting force. He felt the ghost of Izuku Midoriya rise up within him, wanting to cry, to apologize, to confess. But Alactor was stronger. He methodically suppressed the emotional surge. He analyzed it as a tactical weakness, a vulnerability to be controlled. He gently patted his mother's back, a gesture he had observed others performing. "I'm home, Mom," he repeated, his voice a calm anchor in her storm of emotion. She finally pulled back, her hands framing his face, her tear-filled eyes scanning every inch of him. "Oh, look at you! You're so tall! And so different." Her smile faltered slightly as she truly looked at him. She saw the changes. The hard, lean lines of his body, visible even through the hoodie. The faint, silvery scar that traced a line from his temple into his hairline. But most of all, she saw it in his eyes. Her son's eyes had been wide, expressive pools of emotion. These eyes were still the same emerald green, but they were still. They were the eyes of an old soul, deep and calm and carrying a weight she couldn't possibly comprehend. A flicker of maternal instinct, a primal sense of wrongness, made her shiver. "The school, it was very demanding," he said, providing the prepackaged explanation. "They pushed us hard." "Oh, of course, a prestigious academy would," she said, quickly pushing her unease aside, choosing to embrace the simpler, happier reality of her son's return. Come in. You must be starving. Are you staying for good? Did you graduate?" "Oh, I have so many questions." He stepped inside, back into the life he had abandoned. The apartment was a museum of his former self. All Might was still everywhere, on the posters, the clocks, the throw pillows. The sight of the grinning, muscle-bound hero no longer filled him with awe or pain. It filled him with a cold, analytical contempt. He saw the overextended muscles, the reliance on brute force, the glaring psychological need for public approval. A flawed weapon. An unstable symbol. The next few days were a masterclass in infiltration. He played the part of Izuku Midoriya, the returned prodigal son. He spoke of his school in Switzerland in vague but impressive terms, using details seeded into his memory by the League, the harsh winters, the rigorous academic schedule, the focus on holistic personal development. He ate his mother's katsudon and told her it was just as good as he remembered. He helped her with chores. He was polite, quiet, and obedient, but he was a ghost in his own home. He moved through the apartment with a preternatural silence that often startled his mother. He slept for only 4 hours a night, on the floor, his body conditioned to find a mattress too soft and decadent. In the dead of night, while his mother slept, he would practice. He would move through the darkened rooms, a shadow among shadows, his senses cataloging every creak of the floorboards, every nuance of the space. He would perform his katas in the confines of his old bedroom, the movements so precise and controlled that he never once brushed against the furniture. His primary task was to re-establish a normal identity. The League had enrolled him in the local public high school, Aldera Junior High, for the final few months of the school year. It was a necessary step to create a seamless, verifiable educational record for his ultimate goal, the UA High School entrance exam. Walking back into Aldera was like stepping into a half-remembered dream. The scent of chalk dust and disinfectant, the squeak of shoes on linoleum, the buzz of adolescent chatter. He was assigned his old seat. The teachers who had once pitted or ignored him now looked at him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. The story of the quirkless kid who got a scholarship to a fancy European academy had become a minor legend. But the most significant part of his return was the inevitable confrontation with the ghost of his past. It happened in the hallway between classes. He was walking, his gait measured and silent, his eyes scanning the crowd, when a familiar, explosive voice cut through the din. "DKU!" The hallway seemed to quiet. Students scurried out of the way, creating a wide circle, anticipating a spectacle. Izuku stopped and turned slowly. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, his crimson eyes wide with a mixture of shock and incandescent rage. He had grown taller, his frame more filled out with muscle, but the aggressive, predatory slouch was the same. He looked Izuku up and down, taking in the quiet confidence, the changed physique, the unnerving stillness. "What the hell are you doing here?" Bakugo snarled, his hands shoved in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. "I heard you ran off to some fancy-ass school. Guess you finally realized you were a worthless piece of shit and decided to hide." The insult was delivered with the same vitriol as always, but it had no effect. Insults were a tool to provoke an emotional response, and Izuku's emotions were buried under leagues of ice. He simply met Bakugo's glare with a calm, analytical gaze. He analyzed the threat. Subject: Katsuki Bakugo. Quirk: explosion. Highly volatile, relies on overwhelming force. Primary psychological weakness: a deeply ingrained superiority complex tied to his own power. He defines his worth by his perceived dominance over others, especially me. Therefore, the most effective counter is not physical, but psychological. Deny him the reaction he craves. Undermine his sense of dominance. "Hello, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice even and devoid of any fear or deference. "It's been a while. You look well." The sheer, unexpected normality of the greeting threw Bakugo off balance. He was expecting a flinch, a stammer, a terrified squeak. He got polite conversation. "Don't you hello Kaken me, you damn nerd!" he roared, taking a menacing step forward. Tiny pops and crackles of nitroglycerin-like sweat sparked in his palms. "Where the hell have you been? And what's with that look? You think you're better than me now?" "I've been studying," Izuku replied simply. He didn't back away. He didn't even blink. He held his ground, a rock against which Bakugo's rage was meant to crash. This infuriated Bakugo more than any physical resistance could have. This wasn't the Deku he knew. The Deku he knew was a punching bag, a cowering worm who flinched when he so much as raised his voice. This thing in front of him was looking at him not as a threat, but as an interesting specimen under a microscope. "Studying what? How to be even more useless?" Bakugo shoved him, a hard, explosive push meant to send him sprawling. Izuku's training took over. Instead of resisting, his body yielded to the force. He shifted his weight, rotating his hips, and let the push glide past him. His feet moved in a subtle, almost imperceptible shuffle, and he ended up standing exactly where he had been, perfectly balanced, while Bakugo's momentum carried him stumbling a step forward. It looked to the untrained eye as if Bakugo's shove had simply failed. A murmur went through the watching students. Bakugo froze, his face a mask of disbelief. He had put his full force into that shove. It should have sent Deku flying. "You've been training," Bakugo said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He straightened up, his shock quickly morphing into suspicion and even greater rage. "What's your trick, huh? You finally get some lame-ass quirk?" "No quirk, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice still maddeningly calm. Just a better understanding of physics. He met Bakugo's furious gaze, and for the first time, Bakugo saw the abyss in those green eyes. The familiar, tear-filled pools of hero worship were gone. In their place was something cold, ancient, and utterly unimpressed. He felt a genuine, unfamiliar sliver of fear. You still planning on trying out for UA? Bakugo sneered, trying to regain control of the situation, to fall back on the old, familiar script. Still think you can be a hero, you quirkless reject? Something like that, Izuku said, his lips twitching in the barest hint of a smile. It was a cold, sharp thing, nothing like the wide, sunny grins he used to have. It's important to have a goal. He then did the most unthinkable thing. He turned his back on Bakugo. He broke eye contact, dismissed him as a threat, and simply started walking away. I have to get to class. It was good to see you, Kaken. For Bakugo, this was the ultimate insult. It was a declaration that he was no longer relevant, no longer feared. He was just an obstacle that had been calmly sidestepped. A primal roar of fury built in his throat, and his hands lit up with a blinding flash. Don't you walk away from me! He lunged, his right hand arcing back for a full-power explosion. But Izuku had been waiting for it. Without looking back, he dropped his backpack. In the same fluid motion, he spun low on the ball of his left foot, his right leg sweeping out. It wasn't a wild kick. It was a precise, controlled arc aimed at Bakugo's lead ankle. His foot connected with the bony protrusion of the ankle with a sharp, sickening thud. Bakugo's foundation vanished. His forward momentum, intended for a devastating explosion, was violently redirected downwards. He crashed to the linoleum floor with a force that knocked the wind out of him, his misfired explosion scorching a black mark on the ceiling. The hallway went dead silent. No one had ever seen Katsuki Bakugo on the floor. Izuku stood over him, looking down not with triumph, but with a detached, clinical pity. You've been the strongest person in the room your whole life, Kaken, he said, his voice low enough that only Bakugo could hear him. It's made you complacent. You telegraph every move with your anger. You rely on a single, predictable attack vector. You should try being the smartest person in the room instead. It's more effective. He picked up his backpack, settled it on his shoulders, and walked away down the silent, parted sea of students, leaving a stunned, humiliated, and utterly furious Katsuki Bakugo sprawled on the floor. In that moment, the old dynamic of Deku and Kaken was not just broken, it was annihilated. A new, terrifying one had just begun. The true mission began at night. After his mother was asleep, after the city had settled into a low hum, Izuku would slip out of his bedroom window. He moved through the urban landscape as he had moved through the mountains of Nanda Parbat, a silent, weightless shadow. The city was his new training ground. He ran the rooftops, his footfalls making no sound, leaping across gaps that would make a normal person dizzy. He scaled the walls of buildings, finding purchase in window ledges and drain pipes, his movements a form of vertical ballet. His target was UA High School. Ra's al Ghul's directive was clear. UA is the heart of the hero system. It is the factory that mass-produces the very idols that keep the population complacent. It is a symbol, and we are at war with symbols. You will infiltrate it. You will learn its secrets, its weaknesses, its personnel. You will become a ghost in their system, a cancer in their heart, and when the time comes, you will be the instrument of its ruin. For weeks leading up to the entrance exam, Izuku conducted his own reconnaissance. He would perch on a skyscraper a mile away, a pair of high-powered, military-grade binoculars his only tool. He didn't just look at the school, he studied it. He memorized the patrol routes of the security bots. He noted the timing of the staff shifts. He observed the energy signatures of the school's defensive systems, noting fluctuations during different times of day. He built a complete schematic of the campus in his mind, more detailed than any official blueprint. He performed small, probing incursions. He would slip over the outer wall in the dead of night, a whisper of motion in a blind spot between two security cameras. He wouldn't go far. He would simply test the response time of the motion sensors, learn the frequency of the infrared lasers, and then slip back out, leaving no trace of his presence. He was a phantom, testing the defenses of the fortress he was soon to lay siege to from within. During the day, he prepared for the public side of his infiltration, the entrance exam. He knew the written portion would be trivial. His education under Ras Al Ghul had far surpassed any standard high school curriculum. The physical exam, however, was the true challenge. How could a quirkless applicant possibly pass a test designed to showcase flashy, powerful quirks? He sat in his room, not with hero notebooks, but with scavenged schematics of the exam robots used in previous years, which the League's information brokers had acquired for him. He analyzed them with the same ruthless efficiency he had once applied to heroes. He saw their weaknesses. The exposed hydraulic lines at the joints. The unarmored optical sensors. The central processing units located behind a thin plate in the chassis. He trained for it. He built mock-ups of the robot joints and practiced disabling them with precise, targeted strikes using scavenged pipes and pieces of rebar. He practiced his agility, his parkour, his ability to use an urban environment to his advantage. He would not destroy the robots through brute force. He would dismantle them, outsmart them. As the day of the exam approached, he received a coded message on the burner phone. It came from Talia. The encryption was a multi-layered cipher of her own design, one that Raz had forced him to learn until he could decode it in his head. The detective is pleased with your initial progress. Your reintegration is seamless. The incident with the Bakugo boy was a calculated risk, but a necessary one to shatter your old persona. Proceed with the UA infiltration as planned. Remember your purpose. You are not there to make friends. You are not there to become a hero. You are a scalpel, poised to excise a tumor. Do not forget what you are. Do not forget what we are. The message ended with a single, chilling line. Balance will be restored. Your father is watching. Izuku deleted the message, the pixels vanishing into nothingness. He stood up and walked to his bedroom window, looking out at the sprawling, glittering expanse of Mizurafu. The lights of the city twinkled like a sea of fallen stars. He used to look at this city and see a home to be protected, a place full of innocent people who needed a hero to save them. Now, he looked at the same city, and he saw only the system. A complex, interconnected web of power structures, dependencies, and flaws. He saw a patient, riddled with disease, blissfully unaware of its own sickness. The people weren't innocents to be saved. They were cells in a dying body, and their blind faith in heroes was the fever that was slowly killing them. He rested his hand on the cool glass of the window, his reflection a pale silhouette against the city lights. The old awe he once felt for heroes, especially for All Might, was gone, burned away and replaced by something far colder. He remembered standing on that rooftop, a broken child begging for a scrap of hope from his god. He remembered the pity in All Might's eyes, the casual, thoughtless way he had crushed a life's dream. You told me I couldn't be a hero, he thought, his expression hardening into one of cold, implacable resolve. So I found someone who taught me how to be something necessary. He was no longer a fanboy looking up at the sky, waiting for a savior. He was an assassin, looking down from the shadows, preparing to become a surgeon. He was a ghost in the system, and his haunting was about to begin.